Okay, we're back, and this kind of clip, this thing is a reflection on dealing with resistance. So far, one of my least favorite portions of the job, I guess, because you want everyone to be on board, and yet there are those people who are hesitant or resistant or defiant to what you see or what you do. And so I wanted to kind of bring that up and share that with you guys. It's interesting. Coming in, my pastor friend Michael said, "Hey," or not the board guy Michael, and then also the pastor David said, "Hey, by the way, you may have a couple board members that are against this, whatever." And it was interesting because Block talks about kind of angels and ogres, and he says that there's no ogres, but there's also not everyone's angels. And so he talks about this idea of resistance. And so I wanted to give kind of two different real life examples from my experience in this particular case with this idea of dealing with resistance. So the first guy, we'll call him Creed Bratton. It's interesting because Block, in talking about dealing with resistance, he talks about this idea of picking up on the cues. And so even during the very first meeting that we were in there with the board, and they brought me in, and I'm introducing myself and kind of going through and that entering and contracting phase and sharing who I am, there were some nonverbal cues even during that group meeting that I saw, that his arms were crossed, he was kind of back from the table. Not that he was overtly standoffish, you could just tell that he didn't want to be there. And so anyhow, he was one of the ones I was interested to interview. And so during the interview, I'm talking with him, and I keep getting these one-word answers. And so after two or three of them, I was like, hey, something's going on here. So I recognized it, and then I basically named it. I said, hey, you seem to be giving me short answers. And then it was interesting because the temptation was I wanted to go and kind of analyze it, like, you're angry, or you don't like this, or it's a bad idea, or what's going on. But I just, one of the things again from Block, he talks about this idea of, after you name the resistance, to be quiet and let the person respond. And so that was my temptation to not do that. So anyhow, but I named it, and then I just kind of let it hang there for a second. And I was like, man, I'm going to have to say something. The silence is deafening. But anyhow, so he starts in, and Creed did, and he says, hey, this is just, I always liked it. This idea of 12, and this idea of kind of like the 12 disciples that Jesus had, the 12 apostles, that there was some sort of biblical foundation behind it. And if Jesus had 12 disciples, shouldn't the church have 12 board members and whatever? So me naming it opened him up. So I stopped getting those one-word answers and started getting some more dialogue from him, and we discussed it. And so anyhow, I'm going to try to sell him on the idea of 7's also a biblical number, easier number to manage, an easier number to physically get 7 people there for a board meeting versus dealing with the lives of 12. But anyhow, we'll see how that goes. The other resistance I met with that I wanted to talk about was, we'll call her Angela Martin. She was interesting because she was resistant to the change and didn't realize it until I was interviewing her. But her dad was one of the former pastors that helped set up the bylaws of the churches, over 100 years old, but her dad's 2 or 3 pastors back in that succession of line of pastors. And so for her, same type of thing, a little resistance to what was going on with, why do we need to change the bylaws? Is it that big of a problem? And so anyhow, I wanted to mention this book, Authentic Conversations. You can look up and get the details on it on the website under resources. But in this one, just kind of talking about hard conversations and being able to, the subtitle is Moving from Manipulation to Truth and Commitment. But they have this process for kind of confronting and reframing cynicism. And so for Angela, she had this cynicism about the bylaws. And it says, restate the other person's position, ask for acknowledgement that you have it right, extend understanding and agreement for their position, state your choice for hope and commitment in the face of your own reservations and doubts, invite the same choice from the other person in the conversation. And so that's what I tried to do with Angela. I tried to kind of listen, which, sounds easy and basic, and, well, why are we doing a video on listening? But this idea of being able to truly listen and hear and kind of get in that listening posture, and slow yourself down And for me, the writing helped out a little bit, that I tried to take notes during the interview. But I tried to listen, and after I listened, part of the going through and asking for the acknowledgement of it was that helps, because I'm kind of feeding them back how I've interpreted what they told me. So I was going through, and then I was able to say, okay, I think that you're frustrated about this, that your dad had set these in place, and now we're coming in and changing kind of his legacy or his plan for what worked best for the church. So I tried to do that, and in doing that, kind of the same type of thing, that extending understanding that, hey, if my dad set up something and someone else was coming in trying to change it, I might be hesitant about it. And then I was also kind of open and said I may also look at the circumstances surrounding that. Was it a different thing or right thing to do 20, 30 years ago compared to now. So anyhow, but I was able to go and kind of state my position and say, hey, I think as a whole that there's a little bit of structural problems here, not dysfunctioning among board members so much, but really structural problems with how the bylaws are designed, and kind of stated my position and said, hey, I invited her, I wanted her to buy into what I was doing and to what the board as a whole saw that we were doing. And so I kind of invited that buy-in to say, hey, you don't have to do everything I say, but at least listen to it, right? And I'm not going to prescribe one certain thing, but I'm going to give you guys some different options and let you make a decision based on that. If you guys need my help after that, I'd be glad to help. And then I ended it. And again, this idea was kind of a new concept to me that that they introduced me to. This idea that you don't have to argue every single point. You don't have to try to convince everybody all the time. That most times you can state your position. You can say, hey, you're an adult, you're not a child. I'm not going to force you to do this, but this is my position and where I'm at, and this is the reason I did it. And instead of saying these are the reasons that you should do it too, and name off 1, 2, 3, but just kind of let it die there, and didn't try to convince her of my position, but let it go. And so anyhow, there were some tough conversations, but there were some fruitful conversations, I'm hoping. So that's a little bit about dealing resistance in the consultant's journey and my personal journey. Love to hear some of you guys' feedback on that as well. So be sure to leave some comments for me.